This is Castle 1.
Castle 1. I think we're going to get right hand in. Copy that.
That's my drive and turning.
Max speed straight ahead. Perfect angle.
Still gaining on the lay line there. All boats are below.
Good pressure this one.
Hello, podcast listeners. Welcome back to the second part of our chat with multiple British match racing world champion Ian Williams. As ever, if you're tuning in without having first listened to part one, then you know what I'm going to say. Go back and give it a go. Give it a listen first. It'll give you a good idea of Ian's early story and a bit of insight into his approach. In that first part, Ian discusses his early entry into the sport and how being a chess champion at school was part of his journey into the most tactical of pro sailing disciplines. Sounds like a bit of a cliche, but it's actually true. Ian quit a full-time job as a lawyer in the early 2000s, and by 2007 he had topped the match racing world tour, a spot he then revisited a further 7 times. Well, before we get on to all of that, if you're enjoying season 5 of the podcast, then please do head over and show your support at buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast. It's really easy, and your support allows us to stay ad-free so we can keep on delivering these uninterrupted stories. If you've already done so, then massive thanks for the coffees. If not, why not head over and take a look? It makes a real difference. So, back with Ian. And in this edition, we're going to cover his time coaching Ben Ainsley's America's Cup team. But we're also going to dive a little deeper into Ian's approach, his winning formula, as we discuss how he takes on the world's best in what is a very mentally demanding part of the sport.
Sometimes you win by luck, by default, by a mistake by the other boat. If you haven't understood why you've won, then actually you're not learning. If you've won the start and lost the race, then there's a problem, isn't there? Whether it's speed or whatever. If I look at it critically, I didn't have the flexibility to adapt quick enough to where the game went.
You've raced in plenty other classes as well, Ian. I mean, how useful are the quick thinking disciplines of match racing when it comes to fleet racing? Has that been a big advantage?
I think there are definitely some areas where it helps a lot. I think the focus on manoeuvres and handling is a big part of it. If you're doing a lot of tacks in match racing, so if you're losing quarter of a length relative to your opponent, you're in pretty big trouble. And so, learning the attention to detail for that sort of thing, I think is a big help. I think the time on distance on the start's a big thing. It's obviously super critical in match racing to have a good feel for that and learning how to judge that and what have you. I think adapting to new boats, certainly when if I go do tactics on a big boat, I've never particularly focused on one class. So I might get asked to come and sail a Cape 31, and I haven't sailed one for 2 years, and you've got to adapt very quickly to the new type of boat. And I think the match racing circuit is obviously very, very good at that. I guess what you don't learn is the sort of technical side of different equipment. That's where you do miss out. Learning about sail choices. You don't have to make any sail choices. That kind of thing.
Ian, let's talk a little bit about coaching. You're sitting here in your Rockwool Racing team kit, about to get ready for the Portsmouth Sail GP. You've been coaching quite a long time with that analytical brain, putting that to use. But I wanted to talk, first of all, I chatted with my dear friend Annie Lush for this interview. Match racing was just for 2012 and just for the women's teams in the Olympics. And you coached Annie with the Mack sisters, Katie and Lucy. Annie talks quite in depth about your approach, especially to the start, that it was a a maths, a geometry formula, adaptable for whatever boat and wind condition you found yourself in. I mean, not really a playbook as such, but a way to reduce the risk and to be consistent. Talk to me about that approach, because it seems pretty different and more detailed than perhaps most.
Yeah, well, I think I touched on it earlier. A lot of it came through visualization and having to make plans, from scratch and work out a best way to approach the start. And it also came from not having one boat that we learnt to match race in. I think a lot of people who are based at a certain place, they learn to match race in a certain type of class, and then the nuances of the boat become quite dominant, whereas we were learning to do it sailing different boats wherever we went, so we needed a very generic approach. Having said that, it was always based around something between 24 and 40 foot. And really what we use is a framework. I think the most useful is a framework for what is a winning start and how do you get there. And the most useful thing is being able to analyze after the start, how you won or lost and why. And I think that often gets lost if you don't have that framework. Sometimes you win by luck, by default, by a mistake by the other boat, and you haven't if you haven't understood why you've won, then actually you're not learning. And so that's. Yeah, I brought that to the Max Sisters and Annie in 2012, and it was interesting to know whether it would extend to the smaller boats, to the Elliots, because you can spin them on a dime. You can do a full circle in about 14 seconds in breeze, and I think it did work. It required some adaptation, but I think they were a really really strong team in the start. I'm pretty sure they won 5 out of 5 first crosses in their quarterfinal. So that was nice. It's a shame they weren't able to see that through, unfortunately. And I think they had a lot of bad luck in that quarterfinal, unfortunately for them. And then the same. I remember when my first experience in the big boats in the America's Cup class. Again, it was interesting. Could it adapt to the bigger boats? And actually, it translated up into the bigger boats really very, very well. I think the bigger the boat, the more strategic you need to be, the less you can sort out in the last 30, 40 seconds. And doing that Louis Vuitton Pacific Series for China team was really interesting and great fun and exciting, and it went well, and the system survived the change.
Annie said that you're doing the job of, the computer. A lot of racing boats now would start with a computer. That you're doing that job most of the time only with a timer. Is that fair to say? You're good at quick maths. Is that how it's evolving?
Yeah, I think. Mental arithmetic has always been a strength. And that was the system we used. I would use all the other people on the boat to provide the information, and I would try and be doing the calculations. So, time sailing to the boat, time to go, from which you can generate a burn time, where you are on the ley lines, and then what sort of start you wanted. And that, those 4 things essentially went into my brain and spat out an answer of whether we want to do a circle, whether we want to try and lead back, follow back, whatever it is. And it works pretty well, but it does mean there are times when I'm trying to figure something out and compute something, and I miss a wind shift or whatever it is. And so I think it worked really nicely for Annie, because she did that in the middle of the boat, and Lucy was able to act instinctively, and I think it worked really well in that dynamic for them.
I'm not sure I really see that approach with anyone else. I don't know, not to that level anyway. It seems more about perhaps relying on experience and flair, not necessarily developing a system that ensures repeatability. Why is that, do you think?
I suspect that there's a survivorship bias in that the people who get the opportunities in match racing come from, maybe a different place. They often come through high-level Olympic sailing or whatever it is, where there's more of a bias on perhaps the other skills. That would be my thought on it. I haven't thought on that huge amount, so maybe that's not right, but that would be my thought on that.
I have to mention here, there's a lot of folklore about your magic recipe. I mean, at the Cup in Barcelona, obviously podcast producer Tim was working for ACTV, and he was building a match racing feature around the semi-finals. And while researching all of that, he asked one of our sailing experts why you were so good, so dominant. And they told him you'd 42 set moves, 42 ways to win. I've also heard other numbers, and you're laughing now. I love that. I mean, does that amuse you?
That does. I love that. I mean, 42 is that meaning of life, isn't it? And everything.
And everything. I'm not going to name and shame, but I will tell you who it was later on.
That would be interesting to hear. Yeah, I mean, that was super interesting. I guess it's another situation of adapting the framework that we've had from the match racing that we've done on the World Match Racing Tour, but a big adaptation when you have to go into foiling boats and what they're capable of and what they're not capable of as well.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a bit about that a little later. Maybe we'll get the 42 answers. Annie did also tell me that you were probably, or you are, the most consistent winning starter ever, and she said that you would know the percentage of start wins. Do you?
What, over my whole career, or? Yes, certain. I mean, I remember they won, 5 first crosses in their quarterfinal. I remember those sort of details, but I wouldn't say that I know over the whole career. But yeah, it's part of the framework is tracking whether you've won the start. If you've won the start and lost the race, then there's a problem, isn't there? Whether it's speed or whatever. So it's important to. I think it's important in match racing. We touched on it earlier. You never get lineups in match racing, so it's very hard to know if you're fast or not. And so you have to break the race down into different components to know what it is you're doing well and what you're not. And you have to find out early in the regatta what you're not good at, because you've got to get better at it.
I'm really disappointed you didn't have a figure. Annie said it was 80%, but maybe it's higher.
I know Annie, and I'm sure she's talking me up.
We often think about match racing as combative, aggressive, and certainly in commentary we use terms like dogfight, man on man. I mean, you don't strike me in as that kind of warrior, but I might be wrong. I mean, are you that kind of warrior like Ben Ainsley and Jimmy Spittle's aggressive approach? What do you think? How is the sport? Do you need to be that sort of intimidating?
I made a decision quite early on that I wasn't going to try and play mind games like that, be intimidating. I agree. I don't think that suits my personality. I think you can only be what you can be. I think I'm pretty good at brushing off. If anybody, and you touched on it earlier, if anybody tries to intimidate me, I find it kind of funny, and I don't think it impacts me. But at the same time, I don't have the ability to reverse that. I don't think it's not a strength. And that does go into the style on the water as well. I'm not a big one about going for lockouts, for penalties. My philosophy has always been win the favoured side, go there fast, come out ahead, and then defend from there. And that's what's worked for me. I don't think it's the only way, for sure. But with everything, you've got to find your own path, what suits you, play to your strengths.
There is a bit of intimidating, isn't there, in match racing? I mean, I remember match racing against Betsy Allison yelling at me in a massive, booming, authoritative voice, and my back leg would shake. I mean, I was a goner from before the start. There's an element of that, isn't there? Sledging, you might call it, I guess, in cricket.
Yeah, I think sledging. I think you can use that in a lot of ways. Intimidation, maybe. Sometimes you just use it to put the other guy off. You tell him a joke or something, just to distract their concentration. But I agree. I think there are some skippers, successful match racing skippers, who go out with the intention of intimidating the opposition, and I think it has worked a lot for certain people.
It is a teamwork sport. I mean, you've mentioned that. It is the whole team, I always think, needs to be so in tune, match racing. Tell me about yours and how they operate.
Well, currently the team is Jerry Mitchell, John Gunderson and Richard Sydenham. We've always been, I guess, focused on the World Championship. Currently that's in a 4-man boat. In the past it was a 5-man boat, and it's incredible how the dynamic changes between the number, just a small difference there in the number of crew. I've always tried to split it up into sort of areas of responsibility. So I've said, okay, one person's in charge of the speed, one person's in charge of the handling, one person's in charge of the tactics. It's kind of, and again, lean on other people's experiences to try and skills to bring the team up. I think one thing that's changed a lot is when I started, we were focused on every single detail, endless debriefs, really long, used to frustrate some people in the team a lot because, as you know, some people like to debrief and some people don't. But I felt we had to be over every single detail. As I've become more experienced, I think what comes with experience is understanding actually what's important, at different venues, in different conditions, different boats. And we scaled that back a lot less debriefing, and really focused on what we think, understanding what our weaknesses are, making sure we improve those, understanding what our strengths are and making sure we lean on those and try and take the race that way. For example, it's pretty obvious to us that our kinetics are not the best. I think we have an average age of 50 on board now. And we're sailing against 20, 25-year-olds, and they move better. And it's a weakness. We work on it. We try and improve, but we also recognise we're probably not going to get to the level of some of the younger teams on that. As I say, over time it's evolved a lot. And I've been match racing for 30 years now, and so the team really has evolved. Been a lot of different teams. I've lost count, 50, 60 crew on the World Match Racing Tour over those years, and everybody brings something different, don't they? And they've all been great.
I love that you still race with Richard Sydenham. It's beautiful symmetry, isn't it? Exactly where you started in match racing, you're still with them. And I actually did reach out to Richard, and he suggested that I ask you about the book he will write one day with all the terrible umpire decisions and slow boats. I mean, it is part of match racing, isn't it? Dealing with, I guess, that stuff that you can't control. There's no formula for it, is there? You just got to suck it up.
I don't think it's specific to match racing. I think it's across the sport, isn't it? There's luck in our sport. You can't get away from that, and all you can do is put yourself in the best position to not fall foul of bad luck and have some good luck. I think there's definitely something in that. You remember the ones that go against you, and my clearest memories in match racing are the two the World Championships that I feel got away from me. I know exactly, and both of them came down to allowing the umpires to come into the game. And that, I've always known that's not a strength. One of them, you could argue that we didn't have, the other team did a good job of bringing them in. But one of them, it was entirely on us. We just didn't need to need to bring them in, and we did, and it cost us. But as I say, you always remember the losses. I remember the losses a lot more than I remember the wins. I don't know if that's true for you or for everybody, but definitely I have a much stronger. I guess it's a emotional, reaction, isn't it, to losses? That the losses make me more determined, and I learn more from them, and so. I guess it's a cliche, but they are valuable learning opportunities, aren't they, the losses? And you do actually need, I think I need them to keep that edge.
Yeah.
Not that I like them when they happen.
They still hurt.
Yeah.
Ian, we saw you a lot last summer, both in person and on the television. You're a star, weren't you, of the America's Cup? You were with Ineos Britannia, coach. A pre-start coach, I think, was your specific title. How did all that come about? Well, I guess it's 30 years in the making. I don't know if you want the whole story, but that was the America's Cup was the dream, I guess, that made me quit the law in the first place and go sailing, and that was in 2005. In 2007, the last displacement monohull cup was the same year that I made number one in the world match racing rankings. And then the game essentially moved away from me. And if I look at it critically, I didn't have the flexibility to adapt quick enough to where the game went. And I tried. I went and did Extreme Sailing Series, then went on to M32 catamarans. But by the time I figured out catamaran sailing, the boats were foiling, and now there was a whole new thing, and actually by that time if you look, probably then getting a bit too old anyway to then be able to adapt to that new type of sailing. So it started 30 years ago, and the game moved away, and it's always, I sort of finally let go of it, really, which isn't easy to do when it's been your sort of life's goal. And then what was really interesting was when the boats went racing in Auckland, the new AC75s, and we watched the pre-starts. I was like, I've seen this movie before. This is what I've been doing for 30 years. And I actually reached out to Cat Flap was the pre-start coach for Ben at that regatta, and I reached out to him and said, if you guys want any thoughts on this, then it looks pretty similar, and that didn't go anywhere at that time. But then, I guess a year or two later, and Ben and Ineos are gearing up for Barcelona, and Ben just called me out of the blue. I think what the main reason for getting me in was the change to two helms, and needing to have a framework, not necessarily documentation, but some way of bringing the two helms onto the same page, and developing some sort of structure and system that allowed them to work together. I think that was the main driver for me sort of getting the call. But obviously it was it was a dream, and actually pretty unexpected, and fantastic opportunity. I was so excited to get involved. I didn't spend long celebrating, put it that way. It was, this is an opportunity to try and win the America's Cup, and that's the focus. The time trial around the course, they were faster than us. I think a lot of that was in the manoeuvres, so we were up against it to win. There's a lot going on at the wheel of an AC75, isn't there? I mean, looking at the pre-start, you've got the start box, which looks tiny. The other boat, the conditions, and light airs, it's important to keep foiling. Literally, we're not breathing out. We're just willing the boat to stay up. And in strong airs, you very, very quickly run out of space. I mean, give us a sense of how hard it is to rule the start in AC75s.
Well, I guess it's as hard as the opponent, isn't it, and how strong they are, and that's match racing. In essence, is it's very hard. I mean, I'm not sure I'm the right guy to ask because I've never sailed an AC-75. I've never match raced in a boat where there's so much going on, just keeping the boat sailing, and so what I do think is that when it's the same in Sail GP, when there's so much going on for the helmsman, they naturally fall back on their instincts for the tactical decisions a lot. There's not a lot of time to think about them, pre-plan them, and what have you. And 90% of the time, that's good. But you see it, especially in Sail GP, but also in the Cup. There's that 10% where they're going on their instincts, and you can see that it's completely the wrong thing to do. And I sort of saw my job is to try to reduce those situations where people are doing the wrong things, and having a framework and some, I guess, default decision in certain situations, and seeing we still had, obviously, clearly we had plenty of mistakes, but then being able to go back and say, was that the default decision, and yes or no, and if it was, then revise what the default decision is, and if it was not, okay, well, your instincts are pushing you that way, but that's the time to fight your instincts and go back to the default play that we've discussed. And so learning when to go with the instinctive decision and when to go back to the default play, I think that's a lot the essence of it.
It was so interesting, wasn't it? Also with two helms, I mean, so much more complex. I mean, we loved watching that relationship between Ben Ainsley and co-helm Dylan Fletcher as the regatta went on. From the outside, it looked like it grew and flourished as the team progressed. I mean, you were inside the team, of course, moulding that dynamic. I mean, how key is that relationship in those boats in what can feel like a pretty small start box? How important is that communication?
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's huge. There's not time to communicate what the nuances around the plans that you've got, and so you've really got to understand what each other's thinking. I think. From my perspective, I've been through a lot of that with working with a tactician on match racing, where there are some things the helmsman just has to decide, and there are some things the tactician has to decide, and they kind of overlap. And going through that process with the tacticians I've had of when is it, when am I going to go with my decision, and when are we going to go with the tactician's decision? It's quite a similar thing, When do you just go with what the helmsman can see, or when do you go with the offside helmsman who's got more time to look around, look at the data on the instruments or whatever it is, and trying to figure out who's going to make the best decision at what time is a key part of that, and obviously evolving quite fast because of course Dylan came in quite late into that role. And so it was certainly a fast evolution with those two. Trying to make sure they both have the same thing in mind, for sure.
You had to feel for him, didn't you? I mean, every comment the world heard. Every discussion between the two of them. It's a pretty brutal landscape.
It is. It's a huge change, isn't it, in our sport, having the comms broadcast, and you can see the change. If I think back to the discussions that I had with my tactician, in the past during racing, you just wouldn't. If that was being broadcast, you'd think these guys are complete idiots. Why are they talking like this to each other? But that's, I guess, the emotion and the passion at the time, and sometimes it was effective. Jerry Mitchell always used to say that we did best when Bill and I were basically arguing with each other and shouting at each other. We tended to do well when that was happening, but you couldn't do that in the modern environment, and so tempering your communication and also not giving things away. I think there's definitely an element of you don't want to be talking through your plans during the pre-start when you're going to be racing against the same team the next day, and they're going to then cotton on to what you're thinking much quicker. And so being able to, not so much code words, but more just understand what people are, each other are thinking and what the plan is without having to communicate it, I think is a big part of it.
What was your highlight from Barcelona? What makes you smile when you think back on it all?
I mean, certainly winning the Louis Vuitton Cup was huge. I mean, unfortunately, in the long run, nobody really remembers who wins the Louis Vuitton Cup, do they? So yeah, it's the big one that we want, but you've got to win it to win the America's Cup, and so and that was, I guess, for me as well. We had obviously very different equipment to Luna Rossa, but overall it's hard to pick who had the faster package. Certainly in some conditions they did, some conditions we did, and so it lent more on where I was involved, my skills and the match racing, and I think the starting was very important in that final. And so you always want to be as influential as you can, don't you? And at that time, I felt that my influence was important in the team, and that that's a great feeling to be there doing it and making a difference.
It was a big deal, wasn't it? The first British team to make the cup match since 1964. Was there a sense of history? I mean, when you look back on that day, what do you think?
Yes and no. The goal is to win the America's Cup, and so for me it's a stepping stone. It's for me it's the semi-finals. I think I see these things quite differently to other people. I'm quite I'm not sure unemotional is the right word, because super happy to have won because it's the semi-finals. We've got to the big thing, but I didn't spend long celebrating, put it that way. It was, this is an opportunity to try and win the America's Cup, and that's the focus.
Ian, we particularly heard a lot from you about one very close incident in the match and the subsequent umpire call penalising Ineos. We must have replayed this, I don't know, like 100 times. Talk us through that.
I think it's a huge moment. I think, Team New Zealand were around, a time trial around the course. They were faster than us. I think a lot of that was in the manoeuvres, but they were, and so we were up against it to win. And I still feel in my heart we had a path to victory, but it was a very narrow one, and we needed things like that to go our way. We needed wavier conditions. Looking back, the wavy day we performed much better. And yeah, you need things to go your way, and that was one that didn't.
British team going into a familiar manoeuvre, Shirley.
All the way low.
Yeah, they like to tack early, follow behind.
We're ahead of them here.
Prefer to be on the prowl.
90, maybe a little lower. They're going to try and get across
7 and 10.5 knots of wind speed at the moment. British here, potentially got a bit on.
Handing all the time here. Hey, keep on the foils. Keep on the foils. Jesus Christ.
Well, that was close. Those intersections. Almost a clash of foils there.
Nice. All good here. Go here. One. Forward. Still on the foils.
This is the umpire's penalty GBR.
It's a huge moment in this race.
Big arrow for the British.
In hindsight, when I try and analyse it from my non-objective perspective, I was not that surprised with the call at the time. I think the more you look at it, the more it was wrong. But and I felt that with the benefit of an hour of analysing it and showing the positions of the boats at different times, I feel that I, to an extent, proved that it was the wrong call. But at the same time, I've got a lot of sympathy for the umpires. They don't have an hour to analyse it. If I have a criticism of the umpiring, I think they felt pressure to make decisions quickly, and I think they should be taking longer, because those decisions are race defining, and I don't think there's a problem with them taking a minute, even 2 minutes, to make that decision. And I know Richard Slater doesn't agree with that. He feels they need to get a decision out within, I don't know, 10 to 20 seconds or something like that. And I think with a little bit longer to go to replay it, check the situations, I don't know if that, I'm sure he'll say it wouldn't have changed the decision. But I think for us, our sport, it would be, because of the way the penalties play out, it's a get behind penalty. I don't think it really matters if the game has moved on a minute or two, provided you get the call right. And so that's my criticism, very much more than the decision. I wasn't at all surprised with the decision that was made in the moment. I like watching cricket. I think the review in cricket actually adds to the experience as a spectator. That there's all the drama around the LBW decisions, etc. Whereas in football, it seems to take away a lot of criticism of VAR in football. And so I think it's an interesting debate. I think the nature of the penalty is important. It wouldn't really work in the match racing we do on the World Match Racing Tour to take that long to give a penalty. It certainly wouldn't work in SailGP, because the game does move on in SailGP. You need quick decisions. Whereas I think in the current guise of the America's Cup, with penalties that essentially get behind penalty, sure, quick decision's preferable, but I actually think from a spectator's perspective, you could build, this is, you tell me, but I think you could build quite a lot of drama. Okay, there's been a flag, the umpires are deciding who's it going to go against. And it could come in the next minute or two.
Yeah, we love a bit of jeopardy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my view.
How close was it all? Do you think, with an element of hindsight, and what was it that gave Team New Zealand the winning edge?
Well, it's boat speed, isn't it? I think, as I said, I think a lot of that was in the manoeuvres, their ability to accelerate, which plays itself out of tacks and jibes particularly, but also, at the start, they were able to, I think the trigger pulls were better than ours, it's always very difficult to, when you don't know exactly what they've got, it's very hard to separate that from the sailors or the equipment. My hunch is it was mostly equipment, which, of course, the sailors have a part in developing. It was noticeable for me that where, even just a duck upwind, when they dipped us, they were able to generate overspeed, whereas when we dipped them, we found it much harder to generate that overspeed. And I think that they were just able to accelerate that much better than we were. And that, as you said, if you've got a boat speed advantage in match racing, it's a huge thing. And so for me, it was always a very narrow path. I feel that if everything had gone our way, we might have been able to do it, but we needed everything. As I say, we needed more wavy conditions. We needed umpire calls to go our way, that kind of thing.
There's plenty, isn't there, that bemoan the modern approach to match racing at the America's Cup. And what are your thoughts on that? Would a more traditional keelboat America's Cup be more to Ian Williams' liking?
Well, I guess it would give me a chance to get back on the boat. But aside from personal benefit, I honestly I see it both ways. The America's Cup has always been a technology event. It should be at the forefront of technology. It still could be actually in a forefront of technology in a displacement boat. I think the racing was spectacular, and in that regard, what they've got is great. I'd love to see more teams, and less technological does equal more teams. So I just think there's pros and cons gone through everything. I really love to see the handling on the old AAC boats. That's gone. That's a shame. But as I say, the foiling is super spectacular, and it is the cutting edge of technology. Sorry, I'm not really going to give you a clear answer either way. I'm a fence sitter on that.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the past, of course, the career path to the Cup was success on the match racing tour, and now, that's massively shifted, hasn't it? It's all about either a 49er gold medal or a Moth World Championship.
Or both.
Yes, or many of them. I just wonder where you think match racing will go now. As we said, the stepping stones into the Cup and Sail GP is faster, smaller boats. And the match racing tour isn't populated, is it, with the big Cup names anymore? Where do you think match racing sits in the sport, and what do you think its future is?
I think that's right. It certainly isn't the pathway that it was. I think it'll be interesting to see whether some of the Cup teams do come back, depending obviously what happens with the Cup. That the protocol that was published, I think, talked about a lot of fleet racing and not a lot of match racing in the 75s. And so I do wonder whether it would be valuable to get out and do some, just to really to get the right the match racing mindset. I think there is a different mindset needed between fleet racing and match racing. And I think if you don't go out and do it, it's hard. It's certainly very hard to articulate what that different mindset is. But for sure, it's not going to be the pathway. And so I think it has to find its own way. And for me, it's still a really fun, great sport. And I think it's you could say it's a bit of a throwback to the old days. But I still really enjoy watching, the YouTube videos of the monohull match racing, the IACC stuff from Valencia, or World Match Racing Tour, and so I think it definitely has its place in the sport for people that enjoy doing it.
8 world titles and still going. It is humongous. In any sport, staying at the top of the game for so long is very rare. What do you think, Ian, when you look back at your 20-year dominance? How fulfilled is Ian Williams by all of that?
That's a big question, isn't it? When I got into it, or when I chose to go full time, obviously never dreamt that I could be here on 8 world titles. There's a lot of circumstance in that. You look at some of the other great match racers. I mentioned, Russell, Jimmy, Ben. For them, it was a stepping stone. I'm sure if Russell had, carried on match racing, he'd have won way more than 3 world titles. And as I've said, I perhaps got a little bit left behind by the America's Cup, and I guess that's why, in my sailing career, I'm still plugging away with the World Match Racing Tour. But I enjoy it. I'm still learning. Unbelievable, isn't it? But I still think that I'm improving my game and my knowledge of how to win match racing events, and that's the bit that with anything I do with any sport, if I'm still learning and still improving, I'm still enjoying it, and so I'll keep doing it.
Ian Williams, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's that with Ian Williams, a sailor at the pinnacle of the sport of match racing that is happy to admit that he's still learning every time he goes out on the water. You will have heard Ian in this podcast mention several times how helming in the America's Cup was one of his big goals. It's true that up until the 2010 Cup, the match racing scene was the pathway into the Cup game. Jimmy Spittle, Dean Barker, Russell Coates, also Ben Ainsley, they've all been match racing world champion. But Ian had a slightly tough time of it in that as he hit the top of the rankings, the Cup focus really shifted away from monohulls and into the first giant multi-hulls of the Deed of Gift match of 2010, then the foiling multi-hulls, and then ultimately the AC75s. It's a bit of a tough break that happens in the sport, and we hear Ian mention that he wasn't quick enough to try and make that switch. But even so, it was so good to see him playing his part out in Barcelona last year. So a massive thanks to Ian. He's a busy man, and it was great that we finally got to sit down and chat. And thanks too to the Royal Lymington Yacht Club. We recorded our chat with Ian at their clubhouse on the south coast, and what a gorgeous spot. To the team at the club, a huge thanks. Until next time, if you're enjoying what you hear, support the pod. It's super easy. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/sailing podcast and do your bit to help us bring you these uninterrupted ad-free chats from the biggest names in the sport of sailing. Before we go, the usual big thanks to Tim at Vertigo Films. I do say it every month, but making the podcast is no less work each month. So I'm saying it again, Tim, a big, big thanks for all your hard work. And to everybody, keep in touch via social media. I'm Shirley Sail on Instagram and Shirley Robertson on Facebook. And let us know where you listen. That's all from us this month. Thank you so much for listening. Have fun on the water and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle 1.
Castle 1. I think we're going to get right hand in. Copy that.
That's my drive and turning.
Max speed straight ahead. Perfect angle.
Still gaining on the lay line there. All boats are below us in the box.
Hey, the speed here, guys. Good pressure this way.
We're looking at 10.5 at 42. This is Castle 1 standing by. Out.